Year 7. Welcome to your Macbeth lessons. Now, Macbeth is a Scottish tragedy. That's to say, it's written by William Shakespeare, set in Scotland, and the events in it are tragic. What is tragedy, please? Could you write down the word tragedy and the definition? Also, could you explain why The Lady of Shalott is a tragic story? You remember last term, reading a story about a poem about a woman stuck in a tower who sees a knight, leaves the sewing that she's told she has to continue forever, and a curse is unleashed, a mirror cracks, and the events take a tragic turn. So explain why that is a tragic story. You also need to know what a witch is. So let's go forward to the definition. A witch is a person, usually female, who could mysteriously injure other people. Now that you know what a witch is, what characteristics do you associate with witches? Think about what you've heard about witches, what you've read about them, what you've seen in cartoons or movies. What characteristics do you associate with them? How do they look? How do they behave? And finally, how do witches create tragedy in people's lives? So how does witches' behavior lead to tragedy in people's lives? There are 3 or 4 witches in Macbeth, and they manipulate him into behaving in a way that gets him into all sorts of trouble. Before I continue with the lesson, I need to explain your new timetable. On Monday, you'll have a video lesson. You'll have another one on Friday. And because you were so busy last term, we're only asking you to send us work on Wednesday. On Wednesday, I'll tell you what we want you to do this week. So you'll notice there's no reading or anything like that. So it's just a task we give you based on the video lessons. So you're going to explore the time when Macbeth was written. You're going to understand the influence of King James, and you're going to connect the political and cultural situation in Shakespeare's time with Macbeth. So what in England inspired Shakespeare to writing the play? For those who would like a quick summary, Macbeth is a Scottish nobleman who wants to take over the throne from a king called Duncan, and he ends up causing all sorts of problems politically and in his relationships. So could you draw a timeline, please? Just a line across the page, call it timeline. We need 6 prongs because I want you to add 6 dates to it. Make sure there's space enough to add a little information as well. So 6 prongs. First date 1534, 1542, 1558, 1567, 1605, 1606. Remember to leave a little space for the extra detail. And the first extra detail covers Henry VIII. He, in 1534, changed England's religion from Catholic to Church of England. Now, why did he do that? Well, he wanted to divorce his wife because she wasn't producing a male heir. She had a daughter, but Henry wanted a son. So, because all of England was Catholic, he changed the religion to something called Church of England, or Protestant as it's also known. And with Henry VIII in charge rather than the Pope, this angered Catholics because hitherto, that's to say, until then they had power, they had education, they had monasteries and churches. They had to give all that up, really, because their religion was now outdated suddenly. 1542 sees the arrival of a law stating that conjuring spirits is now a crime, basically being a witch is illegal. In 1558, Henry's daughter Elizabeth becomes Queen Elizabeth I of England. Henry had another daughter, Mary, but she was a Catholic. She was older than Elizabeth, but wasn't allowed to become queen. James I was also a Protestant. He becomes king in 1567, king of both England and Scotland. Remember, Macbeth is set in Scotland. 1605, the gunpowder plot is discovered. This is a plot by some Catholics to kill the king. And Macbeth is a story about a Scottish man who wanted to kill the king. So look at how the gunpowder plot and Macbeth have similar themes, share themes. Henry VIII is over the top left. That's his daughter Elizabeth. King James is at the bottom. Guy Fawkes is over at the top right, being marched out of the basement of Parliament and away from the gunpowder. And there's some scenes from Macbeth, the Scottish play, as it's known. So let's push on to talking about what people believed in Shakespeare's time. Well, witches, ghosts, star signs, God, superstition. If a midwife wanted success for a baby, a healthy arrival of a baby, she'd pray to Saint Mary. Shepherds wanting their flock to be safe overnight would fire up a prayer to Saint Oswald. This is a God-fearing, superstitious time in England. Macbeth was written around 1606. It was first performed in front of King James at the Hampton Court Palace. Now, it was important that King James was pleased with the play because he had the power to stop companies of actors from working. So if he didn't like the subject matter, he could call time on the play. Shakespeare was in charge of a company of actors. He needed to make sure that the play pleased King James. So do you think King James would like the story of a man who suffers because he tries to take the crown by an illegal act? Yes, I think so too. It sets a good example for the members of the public, and it shows that people who think of committing treason suffer consequences. Something on King James I of England. Well, he was also known as King James IV of Scotland because he was king of both of those nations. It's said that he's related to one of the play's characters, a character called Banquo. Banquo is a polite, noble, loyal friend of Macbeth's, and it's very flattering. It was flattering for King James to see that one of his ancestors was in a play by the great Shakespeare. James also wrote books. I'll cover one of those a little later. But he lived in fear of being assassinated. Both James and Elizabeth considered Catholics potential assassins. Remember, they were upset that they had their churches and their power taken away by Henry VIII. Elizabeth survived assassination attempts, including in 1586, the Babington plot. She was also shot at on her boat as it sailed up the Thames. James also believed in something called the divine right of kings. You need to write this down. The divine right of kings meant that the king believed he was placed by God on the throne. So God has selected an individual at birth to rule. Here's a picture of a generic king presiding with godly splendor over a generic countryside of England. The Latin motto, non est potestas super terram quae comparetur, means there is no power on earth that compares. There's no power on earth that compares to the king's power, because it's effectively godly power. Similarly, God holds what's called the great chain being. Let's look at this great chain. Let's look at this image in more detail, more closely. You see at the top, God is holding a chain, and the chain is secured by an angel underneath him. And beneath the angel are, lesser angels and saints. And below the saints are human beings. And the human beings sit above animals, animals tame, animals wild, and beneath the animals are trees. So we have living things, and right at the bottom there should be non-living things, minerals. So it's the idea that God creates a hierarchy that only he has stated must remain in that order. So if you were a nobleman, for example, you would not be allowed to aspire to becoming king because your place, says God, is as a nobleman rather than a king. So Macbeth goes against God by wanting to become king. So the great chain of being means that every person, animal, or plant or mineral is assigned a place in the world by God. It's wrong to aspire to a different place. God's at the top. To go against the king is to go against God. Macbeth goes against king, therefore goes against God. What did King James fear? Well, attempts on his life, bottom left. His family had suffered tragedy. His family home is blown up by gunpowder. He feared Catholic plots, also witches. Quick look at the gunpowder plot. Well, Guy Fawkes was arrested and confessed under torture to being part of a wider plot to kill the king when he opened Parliament. Kings and queens open Parliament to this day every year, and Guy Fawkes was discovered among a lot of gunpowder, and his friends were tortured so brutally that Guy Fawkes, before it was his turn, ended up leaping off the scaffold before he was hung, and died before he could be executed. So here, in fact, is his signature after 8 days of torture, during which he confessed and named the other conspirators. All but 2 were found and executed. So witches. Why was King James so opposed to witches? Well, he wanted to marry a woman called Anne in Denmark, and when she was on her way back to meet her husband in England, she was held back in Norway, taking shelter against storms. One of the powers witches have is to control the weather, allegedly. So James tries to rescue her. He's held back by storms. When the couple finally unite and try to sail to Scotland, there are more storms affecting their journey, making it difficult. So James believed there were 70 women who were plotting using witchcraft to keep the couple from landing in Scotland. Keeping Anne away from Scotland was apparently their goal. And James had 70 women tortured. They confessed to witchcraft and were burned because James started to follow the Danish view that witches were agents of the devil and therefore deserved stricter punishment. What other powers, apart from influencing the weather, did witches have? They could use magic to bring about the death of people. They killed farm animals. They could prevent cows from giving milk. They could frustrate domestic operations like cooking, making butter and beer. So people blamed witches for things going wrong. They kept familiars, which is a sort of animal I'll explain in a moment, and they could interfere, as I said, with the weather. Denouncing God, they worshipped Satan. So a familiar is a god, an animal that can apparently help a witch communicate with the devil. It's said that they were given the animals a gift by Satan. Toads, rats, cats, and dogs are all familiars, and the witches in Macbeth hear the call of a toad calling them, croaking to them. So it's another familiar motif of witches. James wrote a book called The Demonology, which describes how witches can make demons appear, and he also says that women are more likely to be witches because they are frailer than man is. In that last paragraph, it's easier for them to be entrapped in the gross snares of the devil. So that explains some of the prejudices that women faced at the time. So if you could answer these couple of questions before you finish today's lesson, what hints have you gained that Macbeth is a tragedy? And why was King James so opposed to witches? Please pause the video if you need more time. On Wednesday, I'll come back to you with 3 questions I'd like you to answer as your written task. Bye for now.